papai, nadi kulada papai, kalam doro korukan, mati ya Amazoro salah yalla doro Afrika, yalla doro gnawat dunia. Bangku abang, Jamaican, African.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us in probably what is the last, one of the last sessions of the day. We appreciate a lot your presence here, and we know that we are competing with other sessions, so we need to make this worth your time. And we're also competing with the fact that at about 6 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken, the reception will start, so we don't want to keep you. So we will be very efficient, very dynamic. We have very interesting speakers, and we're going to talk about 5G and connected mobility. We're going to talk about how this technology can change the world and how Europe wants to be the leader in this respect. We have a 5G action plan. We have a concrete aim, a concrete objective for all member states to have access to this technology. We are investing in infrastructure. And we are world leaders in talking about connected and automated mobility and how it can change our environment, the safety, and how it can really lead to a better Europe. And for this reason, we have the commitment of almost all member states, but also other countries like Norway and Switzerland, all of them signing a letter of intent last year in which they agreed to deploy large-scale demonstrations in European corridors and test this technology, 5G, and how this mobility can really make Europe the largest area in the world where we have such deployment. We have a collection of fantastic speakers with us, representing the political spectrum, the spectrum of all the stakeholders who are putting this in place, but also our pilot projects that we will save for the last part of this session, who will show you how we are really making this happen. So we will also have great opportunities for you to participate. First of all, through social media, I invite you all to use the hashtags that we have for today, ICT2018, 5G, and smart mobility. Please do that and engage with us. We also have our social media, our Twitter accounts, EU Connect Cars, that you can also use to communicate with us. And of course, we use Slido, and you have in the screen the relevant hashtag to which you can send your questions that we will ask our panelists to answer during this session. And we will also give the opportunity through a microphone to all of you to give your own questions during and between the panels. So we invite you to think while you listen. To engage with the question, I think what is more important is to start with our speakers, and I would not like to delay that any further. Can I invite Mr. Michael Boni, member of the European Parliament? He needs no introduction to those who deal with technology. He is one of the proponents, also in his previous tasks as minister in the area of digital, but also one of the big supporters of the technology and the tools that we need to have in place for that to happen. Thank you, Mr. Boni.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much to the Commission and the European Commission and Austrian presidency to organize this meeting, this event. When we are talking about 5G and autonomous cars, I think that it is a very good example of cooperation and the pattern of coordination, how things should be coordinated. And we are talking about 5G not only as infrastructure, but as something which is very important with some benefits to all of us as clients, as drivers, as people who are preparing the world for the digital technology. This is a good practice now, how we are working on autonomous cars vis-à-vis the 5G infrastructure. I think that we can indicate 4 areas which are very important. Firstly, it's connectivity. It's obvious that we need to have a new model of communication that provide higher performance levels in terms of latency, throughput, and reliability of the network. And we need to concentrate on building 5G infrastructure. The second area which is important is related to the standards. We need common standards, and standardization processes are very important, because if you will start with building highways and building those autonomous cars, we need to have common standards. It's not only related to cars, it's also related to the cybersecurity. Could we imagine Could we imagine the autonomous cars moving in a secure and safe way all over Europe without common certifications at the cybersecurity area? So standards are very important. The third area is related to data, because this is not only on cars, this is not only about infrastructure. This is first of all about collecting some data and processing this data. So when we are talking about infrastructure, we need to express that 5G infrastructure is needed. It's obvious, but on the other hand, we need to have high-performance computing networks, and we need to discuss what kind of strategy on data should be implemented in the European Union, looking at the future of autonomous cars, for example. Data sharing, it's clear. But some industries are saying, in some countries, we need to be owners of the data which are functioning at our area. So we need to separate the issue on sharing the data and the ownership, and on the other hand, we need to solve the problem, also thinking about security and privacy protection. And this is the fourth area: create the trust for all of us by fulfilling strong requirements related to security issues and privacy protection. And when I'm looking at some works done now in 2018, looking at the future on 5G and autonomous car, I also want to share with you some dilemmas. First dilemma is related to infrastructure development, because I think that now automotive sector is much more prepared and ready, and they want to be very ready and start very quickly, then some decisions done at the area of infrastructure. So there are three options now. Some industry groups are saying that we need some kind of satellite signal, especially at cross-border areas. Some producers of future autonomous cars are saying that we need Wi-Fi, also especially in cross-border areas. And some of groups are saying that we need proper 5G infrastructure with all functionalities for the future. There are three options, and I think that we need to consider those options, taking into account also the future functionalities, what will be needed for the future development of those areas. The second dilemma is related to the incentives for investments. They are sufficient or not sufficient. We have now the European Electronic Communication Code. We have many incentives, also longer duration of licenses, conditions for co-investments. But on the other hand, there is a problem in which areas business will be ready to invest or not. How to combine public money, also in this perspective, but also in the future perspective, with private money. This is not clear, because when I'm looking at the Digital Europe program, it's fantastic that it exists. When I'm looking at the Horizon Europe, it's fantastic that it exists. But and when I'm looking at CEF, it's fantastic that it exists. But on the other hand, I think that we will have many problems with public money added to some areas, make investments much more efficient, much more available. And the third dilemma is related to data, because I think that we need to put the question if all those data created during the processes of driving autonomous cars will be the common value, common ownership, or it will belong to some different owners as producers of cars or owners of the networks. It's not solved, and I think that we need to discuss it, and we will have a very good example, because those pilot projects cross-border corridors, I think that it will give to us, it will bring to us many new questions and some proper answers to this. And also the third dilemma is related to the consistent assignment of spectrum across the EU. Because we need to aim at unlocking bottlenecks, including identification of spectrum for initial launch of 5G and full spectrum in the future. We need to make some decisions timely, and we need to be ready for auctions. Now this is the timetable, and we need to make something to 2020 and just between 2020 and 2025. But I think that many countries, many member states are not ready with their strategies on 5G. So we will have probably the situation in which some countries will be ready, some not, and it will be not easy to create the common solutions across Europe borders. And I think that we need to consider how to shared use of radio spectrum, and if general authorization will be possible, and how to make easier spectrum trading and leasing. And the last point and the last dilemma is how to be prepared to commercialization. Now there are over 120 trials, and it's fantastic that we have those projects, corridors, 10 corridors, and there are some experiments and people involved in this. And it is very important to understand that there are the first steps to 5G, and we have the trials much more involved at the area of entertainment and autonomous cars. So you are the best leaders of this area. Finally, I want to say that if we will solve some dilemmas, if we will be ready with infrastructure, solve some problems addressed to spectrum and decisions made in the proper time, if we will harmonize activity of all member states, we will be ready after 2020 with autonomous cars, but step by step, because this is the last message. I think that we need to make it step by step, and also consider some issues which are important for questions, for problems of people. Because when we are talking about individual drivers, it's clear we will choose as drivers. When we are talking about transport, we will should discuss about the issue, what will be with transportation drivers now, and how we will organize the set of trucks. And it is a very important challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonner. Thank you very much. May I invite you to take a seat? I think you hit exactly on many of the points that are in people's minds. The issue of data ownership is one of them. We have been carrying out in the last weeks a public consultation in view of a recommendation that the European Commission is preparing for early next year. And we have asked some of the questions that you raised. And the issue of trust was the first. And we saw that there is interest because over 75% of the replies we have received in this consultation come from citizens. So it shows that there is an interest, and in particular with regard to the ownership of data, both in terms of how it will be managed by the business models, but also on the personal basis. And of course, for all that, we cannot move forward without the relevant technologies, and who better than Mrs. Cecilia Bonfeld-Dahl, who represents Digital Europe, has over 20 years of experience in the field of ICT that she brings along, and she represents an association of digital technology industry representing over 35,000 digital companies in Europe. So how will these companies go about this? And what is the role of 5G technology, since this is also the field that you represent? Thank you very much, Cecilia.
I think for once I will actually try to stand. Thank you so much for the invitation. Well, I would say that 5G and the digital infrastructure is, of course, one of the major drivers for growth in general. I would say that people have the right skills and are able to take the jobs and create the productivities and to have the digital infrastructure. And it's something that we're talking about now. I mean, the internet came, but it kind of came out of nowhere. It was not a public strategy. So I would say digital infrastructure is actually a quite new thing. But it is definitely one of the main drivers. Let me just, looking at this one, just to zoom in, this is of course important for automated driving and next generation transportation, but actually 5G and digital infrastructure will be the main driver of digitalization of all the industries in Europe. And if you might have heard me say this before, right now we see that if we look at our exports, we know that 34% of the revenue, so of the full amount, comes from services, data-driven services, but actually around 60% come of the value, so the profits come from data-driven services. This means that the shift in the industry is really where are the values created. We know that there will be 250 million connected vehicles worldwide. How many will be in Europe? I'm actually not sure yet. But I was just speaking to a company like BMW, and they say we actually manage, even here in Europe, we have pilots in Asia, in Europe, and in United States. And even with the current legislation here in Europe, we can actually make these pilots, and there is a great collaboration on private-public partnerships in developing these pilots. But one thing is developing projects and pilots. Another thing is really creating a real incentive of investment in an infrastructure that is needed for the whole society. And of course here, Europe is challenged. We're challenged because we're still fragmented. Mr. Bonney just mentioned, for example, the spectrum challenge, that we do not release spectrum at the same time, and the scale of investment is still challenged due to the fragmentation of European regulations and rules, and ownership of spectrum for that matter. And that is, of course, some of the problems that we have been working with also that the Commission is trying to solve. And I just want to call out one more time, this has to be solved because scale matters. Scale does matter in a digital world, and it's super important. So challenges is definitely fragmentation in decision making and in the way that we handle digital, the factors, the single elements of the digital infrastructure right now. I would say the opportunities is that we actually now have, like it or dislike it or whatever, we have the GDPR. So if you discuss with many of the car manufacturing or who's developing right now, the automated driving, they say, well, it's pretty clear to us how data ownership is. We're not in doubt. People own their own data. This is the principle, right? So we actually have like a standard already of how to think about data ownership, how to think about data processing in place that might accelerate really the safety and the trust of the people. And I think this is super important to talk about because people are like, oh my God, somebody's going to drive the car, what will happen? But that we actually quite advanced in a lot of these areas. We have discussion on the cybersecurity package, on the cybersecurity standard. Europe has a long tradition of actually developing standards within the industry and governments on how to handle standards within new areas. So we already see now standards appearing like RRS standards, so standards for how you actually analyze the data for AI and data analysis in cars and self-driving vehicles. Another strong thing that we have is we are actually worried. This takes us back to the challenge. It's a strength, but it's also a challenge. We have to look at speed also. If we look at the digital both the infrastructure development, but also the innovation, we know that it's a global game. So we can't wait too long. I mean, we cannot pilot too long. So we need more agile decision making on how to make sure that we build this super complex infrastructure, because it's not a simple infrastructure. It's not only 5G or only, big challenge, but it is a layered tier of a digital infrastructure that we need to build and we need to secure. So I would say, fine, we have a lot of advantages. We also have the challenge of fragmentation and of speed in Europe. So leaving that, I would say we're pretty well off in the way that we work together. We are less well off in speed and agility.
Thank you, Cecilia. May I invite you to join us? Well, maybe with 5G we will be faster, but, and this is the whole point. But it is not only about the technology, it is also about the safety that connected mobility and automated mobility can bring to our roads and to our lives. And I'd like to invite Mr. Steve Phillips, who is the Secretary General of the Conference of European Directors of Roads, which comprises the General Directors of National Road Authorities. So he's really very well placed to talk about what will happen in our roads with this new type of mobility. And I know you have a lot of experience from implementing what has happened in research into real life. And maybe here we have a real opportunity because we have a lot of research projects that can really change the way our roads look in the future. So we look forward to your thoughts. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Despina. Thank you very much. And I agree. If I can... Okay, you're jumping ahead with my slide. This is my first ICT conference. I'm a ICT conference virgin, so, you know, bear with me, because I don't know... Well, let me just say, you know, I've been impressed with the breadth of activities, as Despina said. A lot of activities, a lot of projects that I've seen downstairs, and the connections that have been made have been very, very exciting to me. One of the reasons that I was interested to speak today is, you know, we hear a lot about 5G, and it says in the title, 5G, the road to, you know, automated mobility or connected mobility. When we think about mobility, let's be clear, in our definition as road authorities, this is not only about the cars. This is about the whole of the system, and that's why I put up on the screen, and I deliberately changed, Despina used the word, I deliberately changed the word challenges into opportunities, because one of my aims here today is to ask all of you for help. As I say, I've seen some clever stuff downstairs on those stands, and we need your help. These are your opportunities. These are the societal challenges that we are looking to address together. Now, connected mobility has a wide range of definitions. I mean, we start with our definition of infrastructure. We like to say, if you look at the Oxford English Dictionary, which most people say is the standard definition, infrastructure is not just physical infrastructure, it's not just digital infrastructure, it's the whole organizational and facilities around it. So we like to say, as road authorities, we are infrastructure. And these are our challenges, and this is what we need to solve so that we can deliver the societal benefits that we seek to deliver. And you'll see them on the thing. I mean, on the screen. I don't think many of these are very surprising to you. So when we're thinking about how do we rush off and have these 5G corridors and everything else, just reflect to think, you know, that we've got road directors who right now are thinking, how do I fix that bridge and how do I prevent it collapsing? We've got road directors who are thinking about their budgets. Of course, that's where I'm saying this is an opportunity. This is not just about, you know, the threats. I saw a great demonstration downstairs about how we can use the fibre optics that we're already installing alongside our roads for detecting the state of the infrastructure. Now, that's a perfect example of the kind of parasitical use or dual use we can think of a lot of these activities. So one of my pleas in this short time is to start to break down a lot of the silos. I know everyone talks about silos and everyone says we're breaking down the silos. But actually, it's not just about how you put teams together, it's also how you get teams to think together and to address each other's problems. Again, that's why I put this on the screen. I want you to reflect, I think, because that's going to be up there for 5 minutes, to reflect on, okay, these are the things that are affecting road authorities, and what can I offer to those? So whether it be connectivity and digitalization, we heard a lot earlier on today about the things about society and how society is getting more involved. Road authorities increasingly are having to look about their interaction with Twitter and everything else. So those are some of the issues. But anyway, going back to the core issue we're looking today, what role does 5G play? Now, I think we are tending to think, as I say, very much in silos and very traditional. People are thinking about 5G in terms of connected cars. We hear the business models, it's going to be infotainment, so it's streaming videos to people's cars while they can take their hands off the wheel, and then there's a bit of ITS. When you look at this chart and when we engage in some of the discussions we have already, actually we see a whole plethora of different applications and whatever for 5G. But not only for 5G, but I'll come back to that. So the low latency, it's not only about vehicles communicating with each other, it's also about instruments in the infrastructure, and we've seen projects on this, communicating with the cloud, having all of the, the data transformation and whatever computational done in the cloud, and then transmitted back. That's the type of things we can do with low latency, so it's not just about vehicle to vehicle. Just as an aside, I mean, some interesting things. You know, we had an issue recently about truck parking. Many of you know this, and this came onto issues such as animal welfare. This is something that none of us ever thought before, but all of a sudden issues like animal welfare start to come to the fore. And you know how some parts of society get very much about animal welfare. So we've been thinking, well, okay, how can we use these technologies to improve the care of animals that are in transit? We're spending a lot of money on monitoring food in transit. Well, what about the food when it's alive? Anyway, that's just one example of the types of things that we're looking at. Anyway, as my time is running out, I just want to stress two things. The first one is 5G we see as the summit of the pyramid. It's like the moonshot, the Apollo program. It's great, we need that to take forward the technology, we needed to drag it. But from our perspective, please don't forget that this is not only about a few corridors and that we are responsible for managing huge networks. So all of the technology that's developed needs to work right across the network. So we are looking at legacy systems. Don't forget the role of 4G. We need ubiquitous 4G right across the networks. And that's one thing. And then I think my final comment would be is we fully get, I mean, we've been told many, many times, Europe wants to be first. We're not trying to hold you back. We're not saying, oh, you have to slow down and wait for us to catch up. Our message to you is, if you look at that chart, every single road authority on the planet has the same challenges. So if you get it right in Europe, you'll get it right across the whole of the world, and I think then we will have really delivered some good benefits for society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. You know the drill. Join us for the discussion later. And indeed, you have given us a very encouraging message about the opportunities that go beyond what is strictly related to how you will put the cars on the road, but everything that comes with it. And I think this blends very well with what Cecilia said earlier about the link to the possibilities for smart cities, for the IoT, and I'm sure we will discuss about it later. And please do send your questions. Do not forget we have a Slido. Use also our Twitter account. We have moderators here who will make sure your questions are passed to us. To close this panel, we also wanted to have a national perspective, of course, from the country that is hosting us, the country of the European presidency, from Austria. Unfortunately, the State Secretary, Mr. Reichert, who is from the Ministry of Transport, could not be with us, but I think he has asked a very eminent representative from the National Federal Agency, actually, for roads, Mr. Bernd Dattler, to represent the Austrian perspective for the subject we will discuss.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me today. In the next 5 minutes, I will give you a little insight on what we as a road operator think about 5G and smart mobility as such. So who are we? We are the sole operator of all highways and expressways in Austria, which is roughly 2,200 kilometers. We have 30 billion kilometers driven per year on our roads. We are purely toll financed, so we are not a road directorate as you would expect. And we are roughly 2,800 people. Now, in terms of smart mobility on the roads, we are talking about automated driving, and everybody knows it will be a case connected, automated, shared, and electric. But however, there is a lot of drivers around who may give some crossroads that are not, that do not lead to a uniform outcome. Among them, of course, IoT, artificial intelligence, cooperative V2X, and also, of course, connectivity and 5G. So how the final outcome of automated driving will look like, I would say today is not entirely clear. And of course, 5G has a strong role to play there. So why do we care? I mean, we could say we have our roads and it will happen anyway, but our core business is efficiency and safety. So we want to bring as much people as possible, as efficiently as possible, and as safe as possible to their destination on our roads. And of course, there are a lot of drivers around, and I don't want to mention them all, but of course, how connectivity and communication will look like on the road has a big role to play on how the capacity will change on our road and how the level of safety will be. What do we use today? We are in the comfortable position that we started with fiber optics 14 years ago, so we have a full fiber optic network today. We have several 10,000s of IoT equipments on our roads, so we have a very complete picture of what is going on our road, fortunately. So this is cameras, traffic sensors, this is infrastructure-based radar sensors, video detection, you name it. So actually what we created now is a digital infrastructure, a digital representation of what is going on our network. However, this is only, let's say, the entry card. Our USP is that we have unique information that we know first. So this is, of course, the whole static data. This is also including things like the variable message signs. This is also, of course, what we have in terms of video detection. And we want to share this data. We want to bring this data into the cars and to make them available for professional services. And that's why, of course, we need communication, and in that case also 5G. So our vision for the future is that automated driving will not only happen from, as Steve already mentioned, from the car side, but also as an integrated system, infrastructure and vehicles combined. And our vision there is what we call infrastructure support levels for automated driving. So increasingly providing information on the one hand, providing in level B here also cooperative perception, and in the very far future maybe have some sort of cooperative driving. Now, the view on communications. We really love 5G, but we are no technology vendors. So actually our clients don't very much care about technology either. So it has to work. So we need what is possible. And 5G has a strong role to play there. And don't take me wrong. But the question is one size fits all the right approach? Or should we look into what we already have? And should we not combine also legacy technologies and embrace what we already invested? So actually, LTE will be around there for a long time as well, because 5G core is compatible with LTE base stations, and our networks are quite new in Austria. So the question is if there will be a sole 5G network. I personally doubt it, because the investments made in LTE are not little. So we will use that stuff for a long time. And also the GSMA has proposed that in 2025, still there will be only 30% of the whole traffic in pure 5G. The rest could be done with LTE as well, because it's a very capable technology, and LTE-V is also very good. On the other hand, we also have this Wi-Fi, as already mentioned, and this is also not a one-size-fits-all technology. But for instance, in areas where it's not commercially feasible to deploy 5G, why not use something else? So what we really would like to see is a cooperation of different technologies, bring them together, let them work together in a seamless way, and I would be very happy to talk about that. If you're interested, then please drop me a line on LinkedIn, would be very nice. Yeah, actually, this cooperation is what we would like to see in communication. Now we have a test track also where we look into that in the area of Graz. It's very proposing. We see very promising. We see very good progress there. Yeah, and actually the whole future of automated driving it will take some time until we see the benefits, of course, but we are very much looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for giving us also the national perspective from the country of the presidency. Last but not least for this panel, I would like to invite Mr. Willem Jonker, who's the CEO of EIT, for some 200 European corporations that get together to work on education in technology. You have a lot of experience in this area. These EITs are a great pride of the European system. You may want to also explain what the EIT does, because it is a particular way of gathering together people, SMEs, research universities, and making them work for common education purposes. And how does this link to what we're trying to achieve, being the leaders in bringing this mobility to our people through 5G technology? Thank you, Willem.
Thanks very much for the kind introduction. Thanks to the organizers. The first thing that came to my mind when I saw the title of the session, then I thought, smart mobility is the first thing that then comes to mind, 5G. Let's have a look. You asked me to say a few words about EIT Digital. EIT Digital is about ecosystems. It's about innovation in ecosystems, and it's about bringing the different stakeholders together. And what do you do with these ecosystems? Well, you drive entrepreneurship and innovation. It means we create businesses and we help to grow those businesses, because Europe needs much more digital businesses. Although I think you have 35,000 already, why not double it? And then the final thing, it's all about talent. I mean, you cannot drive digital innovation without entrepreneurial education. And here you see a picture. This was actually 2 weeks ago in Eindhoven. We graduated from our entrepreneurial master school. 250 digital entrepreneurs that will help Europe. So when you look at the connected car, this is actually what you see. And the main message is in the middle. The car is transformed into a data server on wheels, 4 terabytes a day. That's quite a bit. So then, to handle all this data and this connectivity needs, you need technology, network technology. And of course, if you look at the promises of 5G, you see a perfect match. All the kind of things that you would need, 5G should be able to support. However, Waymo, 10 million miles without 5G. So it's great that it matches, but if you can do it without it, why do it? And the question was asked before. So I think we should really dive into that question very serious, because there are alternatives. We have a lot of alternatives being worked on in our portfolio of innovation activities, where we create businesses and where we support scaling up of businesses. And if you only look at mobility on the road, we even work on 5G in the air. And there's another thing I would like to bring to the picture, because if you look at smart mobility, this is not something just about cars. Smart mobility is about a user need that is at position A and wants to go to position B in the most convenient, least polluting, and as cheap as possible. So that's actually what mobility is about, and that goes far beyond. That is about multimodal mobility, that's about matching platforms, and there's a lot of technology out there that's working on that as well. So if you summarize that, then the first question you could ask is Europe well positioned for autonomous cars? Well, you need communication technology. I think we have 2 very strong players in Europe. You need navigation technology. We have 2 very strong players in Europe. Of course, they have a hard time trying to beat Google, but they are there. You need car manufacturers. Well, I think if there's one thing that we are very famous for in Europe is that we can build excellent cars. So that should not be the problem. But you need a few more things. What you also need is cybersecurity. So who makes sure that all these networks that are heavily dependable really are secure and really work? The data, are we that good at managing all the data that comes around in this driving data service? And how about the digital skills? If you see the lack of digital skills in Europe, do we really have all the ingredients to win this game. And if you take it one step further, are we well positioned for smart mobility? I would say we do master the key technologies to drive the autonomous mass market, because we have the communication, the navigation, the car manufacturers. However, we need to add much more expertise on data security and software. And if we want to make the next step, smart mobility goes far beyond, and we really have to step up where it comes to platforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Willem, for ending this series of presentations with such a positive tone. I would like now to invite all of you to participate in this discussion with us. We heard a lot of positive messages, but we also saw that there are many questions. And I noticed that right at the beginning and right at the end of the discussions, you mentioned, both of you, Willem and Mr. Boni, cybersecurity. And this is one of the very typical questions and dilemmas that we often hear when it comes to trusting this kind of mobility and the future. What about cybersecurity? What about all these vehicles being used as a means for attacking, in fact, the society and people? What do you think Europe should be doing to address that? You had some ideas, Mr. Boni.
You know, we are starting with the Cybersecurity Act, and one of the issues is related to new certification schemes. Now in the European Union we have 28 models. Of course, some years ago, 15 countries decided to sign the agreement, and it's easier, but I think that we need certifications. It's clear. Secondly, I think that this Cybersecurity Act also is raising this problem. We need to raise the awareness of the problems of cybersecurity. In the European Parliament, we have discussed about cybersecurity hygiene, also as some kind of topic for teaching young people at schools. Because this is our common responsibility. This is not only the responsibility of critical infrastructure, but on the other hand, we need to define what kind of critical infrastructure we will have when we are talking about autonomous cars, because it will be, of course, networks, but also high-performance computing networks for processing the data, and many, many additional, probably, because it will be some kind of special areas, just cross borders, just between countries. So I think that cybersecurity issues, we need to go forward. And on the other hand, I think that we need to create our industry, European industry, much more focused on cybersecurity. So this is when we are talking about autonomous cars, we are talking about cooperation between car industry and telecommunication industry. And we need to add, for example, cybersecurity industry. And we need to remember that there is no one solution which exists over 1 year. It should be dynamic, yes, it should be changed. It should be also with using artificial intelligence. When we will have some attacks, we can recognize better using artificial intelligence some schemes of attacks. And it is, of course, important for the future responses. It's a key issue, of course.
We should say that has been announced in the recent so-called mobility package adopted by the European Commission. We are working in recommendations regarding cybersecurity, considering what has been done at the international level in the UNICEF, but also considering the future certification framework. So we are hoping that we will be able to propose some meaningful recommendations in this area to the member states. But I wanted to ask, and also the other panelists, are there other areas where we need to intervene by regulatory or other policy means? Cecilia? You mentioned that for data protection we have the GDPR, and that should be a no-brainer. We just follow that lead and that should help. But is that enough, for instance?
I mean, honestly, I think we have a quite strong tradition in creating standards and high performance safety rules, and an industry like the car manufacturing industry and the car industry in general is definitely very strictly regulated already. I think we're quite well off right now looking at cybersecurity and in the data ownership discussion and data processing discussion. So I think it's actually more about implementation. There will be new things all the time. As we go along with the pilots, we'll have to evaluate if there are new areas where we need intervention or guidelines or standards or audits. I think it's an iterative process, and I think we will learn more as we actually develop the corridors and the pilot project view. This is also why I said it's not necessarily bad to be piloting, because you learn a lot, and you know also how to regulate better in an environment when you have experience. But then, of course, if we look at the other part of it, at a certain point, you also need to create clear incentive structures for innovation and investment in a game where scale really matters, and you need to get, a natural, not even project-based investment in a safe and secure infrastructure. And that's where we're lacking a bit behind.
But are there any areas where you see, from the point of view of the digital technology industry, that there may be a need for regulatory intervention or more internal market approach, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, as I also said, I mean, in general, the spectrum and the harmonization of the auctions, I mean, we'll have to break that silo thinking, country-based thinking on how we build digital infrastructures, and if not, I'm sure that there will be another way of doing it. I mean, that will basically solve it. Already now there are research in how to use really low frequency in a totally different way that actually allows it to be utilized much more than it is now. And of course, then there's artificial intelligence will be a part of this. But I think right now we're looking more at how to create the guidelines, how to make sure that the development processes, that standards are created. So we know that there is transparency in this process. Again, we're piloting a bit here, but I think we're quite aware of the areas that will be there. But I think the biggest challenge is definitely the fragmentation right now of the basics of the infrastructure.
I see Willem wanting to also intervene.
If I'm allowed, I would like to add something here, because the question was about what is the role of the government when it comes to regulation around all these autonomous cars, and we talked about security. What you will see is indeed a kind of drive to standardization, like the car themselves. I mean, what brand of car you go in, you drive it more or less the same way. Maybe the driving experience is different, but at least you have the same equipment around you. With more and more software going into this car, you will see also development of standards. So I think what you will see in the future, that there will be certain requirements on the cars, that certain interfaces mandatory have to be supported by the cars. Like there should be an airbag, well, there should be a antivirus software with that and that interface. There should be a connectivity connection with that and that protocol that needs to be supported. These kind of commands should you be able to give to the car to stop it in an emergency case. So I think that that is the kind of regulation you will envisage here, where when there's more and more this technology, that will be regulated. And the way it will go, we will first develop it, then there will be a lot of accidents, then people will be convinced that something needs to be done, and then we will have some regulations to make it smoother. And that's how innovation goes, and that's all fine, as long as we are a bit careful in the experimentation phase, because of course these infrastructures, there are people at stake here, and we see the incidents in the US with autonomous cars. A single incident with an autonomous car gets enormous exposure, while at the same time, of course, with normal cars, there are far more incidents on the same day than there are with autonomous cars. So also there, the society has to somehow adopt and get a kind of balanced reaction on how this immersive technology or this advancement of this technology will go.
Well, Steve, can you convince people on the basis of this narrative that the roads are safer with autonomous cars than with our regular conventional cars?
Well, I can start off by saying we want to ban the word autonomous cars.
because autonomous by definition means it doesn't have any connection. So, we really are pushing this idea that this is about connected and automated. Indeed, we've even laughed, maybe it's connected and assisted. But so that's one element. But in terms of the legislation, and I think we're starting to get there now, and I'm not a proponent of more and more legislation, but I think we are now entering an area, and that's why I stress the connected, and I think that's what is where the infrastructure and the infrastructure environment is based on almost a different legislative philosophy than the vehicles are. So we got vehicle type approval, we got product approval. It's all about the standards of the vehicle when it sits on the forecourt and when it leaves the forecourt. That's the basis on which pretty much all vehicle legislation has been built for years and years and years. And we've kind of, okay, there's been a few problems, but we've kind of dealt with that. Whereas infrastructure, generally, much of the legislation is about the running of the infrastructure and what we're doing in a day-to-day. So as we move together to this connected future, I'm still struggling to see how the legislation, the whole legislative structure, is going to keep up with that. I mean, I'm looking forward to your next refit, when you're thinking, okay, what does this mean for connected automated mobility? And when you have to rethink a lot of the existing legislation because the interfaces no longer match.
Yes, Mr. Bonney.
The problem is to define what is the most important now, the legislation or implementation. Because when we are starting with implementation, it's clear that we need to solve the problem of, if I look at the situation, of different types and options of using infrastructure. Because it's important when in the communication, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure, infrastructure to vehicle, we will base this infrastructure on Wi-Fi, on satellite, or something like that. The Commission will say that we need to be neutral on the technology side, and it's okay. But on the other hand, we need to analyze all consequences for the future, to know more about this. And the additional point is related to the connected cars and autonomous cars. They should be connected, of course, but they should be autonomous. But when we are talking about private drivers, we need to have many levels, yes, and options for decision, for choice. And the technology, the cars, the standards should be adjusted to this kind of situations, yes. And the situation of changing the model of making the decisions by driver or by algorithms, when I have talked with people from the University of Delft, is taking just about 5-6 seconds. And it's very dangerous time, yes? It's a transition time. So also we need to consider this kind of problems.
Yes, Bern.
Maybe to add something, I think we need definitely new fields of legislation standardization that we haven't thought about so far. I mean, today a car is something that is produced once, delivered, and then it stays with the customer. But as we end up with, let's say, a computer on wheels, we have software updates. So the question in the first place is which tests has an autonomous car to perform until it can go on the road. I think standardization is necessary there on the one hand, but on the other hand, if there is a software update, a security update possibly, shouldn't I be forced to do it? Today, if I have my mobile phone, I can decide whether I do the update or not, but in case of a car with a security fix, this should be mandatory. So we need additional, let's say, rules for things that should be done over the lifetime of such cars, and otherwise we might end up with different problems on the road. In addition to that, if you're talking about cooperation, which we hopefully will see among different automated cars, then the question is how do they exchange data with each other? With different brands, all of them collect different types of data in a different format, they are not interchangeable, so how do we ensure that this comes together to a uniform picture of the traffic on on the road. So this is also something that is very relevant. And if you're talking about communications technology, then of course the use cases should be technology agnostic, because if we cannot make one size fits all happen, which I would like when we start with a clean sheet of paper, but we have infrastructure deployed, then this should work together, but this needs standardization.
Yes, Cecilia,
No,
please.
I mean, basically, of course, with a connected car, let's call them connected cars, vehicles. Okay, connected vehicles, even better. So you actually get a huge IoT device driving around on the road, and means that of course the software and the infrastructure becomes much more critical. And maybe it's just because I'm kind of in this technology business for so long that for me this is just a natural product development, right, that has happened with so many other areas. And therefore, of course, whatever you do on safety, you also have to do with the new product features of that self-driving IoT device on 4 wheels, or maybe only 2, who knows. So I think the methodologies on how to go about this, we are actually quite experienced. Of course, then it will be an iterative process and it will go quite fast. So I think the pilot project way of also doing legislation has to enter this world in a collaborative way of seeing, okay, what is it actually? What kind of challenge is it? What kind of, is it the software updates? Is it, so we actually can define that. And of course, the security of the infrastructure will be key, as it is safety first.
Absolutely. Well, this is where whatever we do horizontally in other areas like cybersecurity is extremely relevant, because it should cover also the infrastructure and not just the vehicles, to use exactly the term that you mentioned, Steve. But it is true, though, that when it comes to data and this issue that you mentioned, Bernd, that we don't have a common taxonomy, we will need to find some way of communicating so that we make also the relevant business models thrive and make them meaningful. How do we do that? Is there legislation? Does this require European intervention? Can countries do it alone? Isn't that where Europe can help?
I think it's always difficult to create markets with legislation, but on the other hand, if you have no legislation and let it evolve the Wild West style, then you might end up with an outcome that you don't like. So my personal favorite is to have some guidelines that provide a playing field, and then let's play it out. So, but how they look like, of course, this is something we should find out together.
Yes.
Of course, there is this diversity of data. This was also a problem which we had with social platforms in Europe. We had many social platforms with all the different formats, and this is solved in an unhappy, unfortunate manner, because now everybody has Facebook, so everybody has the same thing. So I think there is something we should be a little bit aware about, that if we go on in a very fragmented way, that there may be a third player from somewhere else that takes over the whole platform in the car when it comes to data. And then you get a harmonization without any regulation, but you have a de facto monopolist who is driving the show.
These are all the exact issues that we're studying in the European Commission. I don't know whether there are questions also from the friends who are in the room. I tried to channel the questions we received via Slido to our speakers already. And I think that I think everybody's waiting for the next stage, and we're taking the lead from what you said, Cecilia, the pilots. The pilots have been born because we're trying to support deployment and see through deployment what we are facing. And this is why we have the next part of this session, and I'd like to invite the next speakers to join us while we are applauding really the fantastic discussion that we managed to have, and our speakers. I would like to thank you all very much. You've been fantastic, and you have kept the time as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Baum. All the best. Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ben. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. So can I invite the next 3 wonderful speakers that we will have, and who will help us explore the European corridors. May I invite you to join us, please, on the stage? I'm sorry, I'm trying to find my... No, all three speakers, please. So I would like to invite Mr. Jacob Banskart, Mr. Francesco Profumo, and Mr. Miguel Angel Lacunas. I'm sorry for the pronunciation. Thank you. Thank you for joining me in applauding them. So we decided to have a more dynamic approach, and this will allow also to have a discussion. So we have here three projects, basically. Three realizations of what we are doing in Europe in trying to be pioneers, in trying to put on our roads, make a reality, this new mode of transport. I'd like to start with Mr. Jacob Banskart, who is the CEO of Vertico, and who's going to present to us the 5G MOBIX project, which aims at evaluating 5G technologies, performing trials at 2 cross-border corridors between Spain, Portugal, and Greece, Turkey, as well as on 6 national urban sites.
Thank you, Despina, for this introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. We are now 3 persons standing between you and a cocktail, so we better hurry up a bit with these presentations. So I'm going to present to you our work in the 5G MOBIX project. And first I would like to explain to you why are we as Vertico involved in this project. Well, first of all, we have been working for more than 25 years to bring intelligence into the mobility system. And we are not we are trying to improve the world we're living in. We are trying to make it safer, cleaner, and more efficient by using technologies. And therefore, for us, it's not about a revolution to talk about 5G. It's an evolution of the technologies that we are developing, deploying in the mobility system. So what is it that 5G can do? I think we have heard some of the advantages of why we are working with this project on deploying 5G. We are working in corridors, we are working cross-border, and the cross-border aspects is focusing on the reliability of the service, continuity of the service. It's also looking at the broadband capabilities of 5G and the low latency, of course, and some of all the use cases that we can deploy by the improvements in the technology. So that's why we, until now, have been working with other technologies. We will be working with hybrid technologies in the future, and 5G is for us just the next step, as many other technological developments will be for what we do in the field of safety and efficiency for the mobility sector. So we are doing this in 2 corridors, as Despina mentioned. One is between Spain and Portugal, Vigo and Porto, and there we have a couple of use cases that we are working on. As you see here, lane merging and automated overtaking are 2 of the key automated use cases that we're using in the Spain-Portugal corridor. And for Greece and Turkey, it's on truck platooning and also on see what I see augmented vision for truck platoons that are the key use cases that we're using in these 2 corridors. We're also doing testing and validation in France, Germany, Netherlands, and even working closely with China and South Korea. China especially is extremely interesting for us to see their developments, to see how the European industry can cooperate with China on the developments there. We had a visit in April this year where we mainly discussed automated and connected mobility for the future, and it was quite clear to the big European industries and also the European authorities that There's so much happening outside Europe that we need to learn from, that we need to cooperate with on the standardization side, but also just as we are dealing with global markets for the key players in Europe, we need to learn from the other markets on how we can position ourselves there and cooperate with them. So it's quite a big consortium that we have put together for the project, and we have 14 countries, we have 56 partners in the project, and I would have loved to be able to present to you some of the first results, but we had the kickoff meeting 2 weeks ago. So at the next conference, I would be more than pleased to come and present more of.
It's a deal.
of what our findings have been. I think what is important here is that we actually have the coverage from the research sector, the industry, also for the autonomous, for connected and automated driving, and we are thereby covering all the aspects of cooperative, connected, automated mobility that we are developing for the future. If you want to know more about our activities as they progress now, if you want to know more about connected, automated mobility that we're working on, then you can contact us as coordinator of the consortium. And I know there's a brilliant stand downstairs as well for 5G PPP, and they know much more about all the activities that are happening supported by the European Commission in the field of 5G, and they can give you much more information as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As you can see from the last slide, this is a very impressive consortium, 58 members. From many different countries of the European Union, and it's quite a large project, so we really take you up on your commitment for further presentation. If you have one hope from this project, what is that?
Well, of course, what we are trying to do is to scale the deployment of 5G throughout Europe. So, of course, one hope would be that by developing these use cases, by doing the verification and the testing, that we show the benefits of 5G to improve safety and efficiency in the mobility sector, and that we accelerate the take-up of connected automated mobility services, and that one day the users of this will say, yeah, of course, we needed to go that step as well, and that we were a part of pushing for this development. Of course, saving lives along the way would be fantastic.
Thank you very much. This is the aim. Thank you very much, Mr. Bonsgaard. And in a similar vein, I'd like to welcome Mr. Francesco Profumo, who is president of the Fondazione Bruno Kessler, and who will present the objectives of the 5G Carmen project, inspired by the opera. You will tell us.
Yes, sure. The name is.
The aim of the project is to validate some innovative, connected and automated mobility use cases in the Brenner corridor, which crosses through Germany, Austria and Italy. You may want to tell us how will Austria change after this project at the end of your presentation.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Profumo.
Thank you, thank you. Let me start from a short movie, because I was thinking that the best way is to introduce the project is to go through the movie. as you can see, the idea on the project is to have an open-air lab. You know, for a long time we were talking about a European project having partners that they are coming from at least 3 countries in Europe, but never we had such a type of project where we have one lab that is through 3 different countries with 25 different partners, and the connection is a real connection. And this is, I think, is really a step up for the Europe in general and for the research in Europe. We know that technology is not yet well defined. We still need a lot of work from the research and innovation point of view. But I remember that Mr. Oettinger was saying since when he was the commissioner for the energy that the real driver for the digital revolution will be cars. And is correct, because right now most of the technology that we are going to implement for the car connectivity will be the future for our standard life, for our daily life. And this is the real point that we want really to stress. When we were preparing the proposal, for sure we were working from the technical aspect, but we were so strongly involved in the impact of the project. And this is a key point, you know, for people that they are coming from the technical university, from the scientific world. Today, to talk more and more about the impact of the project is really a key advantage for the future. And let me talk about briefly the 3 major points that we were looking for. The first is safety. Maybe you know that in Italy, we still have 8% of increase of accidents that are for dead people per year. And this is really a critical point. In the meantime, in the US, we have more than 7 million of accidents per year with cars. That in both cases, I feel that one of the major issue is how we can improve the safety of our driving. And the 5G Carmen is looking as the first main aim to improve the quality of the safety for people. In the meantime, this connectivity is really a boost drive on this direction. And we are feeling that more and more we are going to have this technology that is becoming mature, more and more we can get a good result from this point. But the second big issue is pollution. And what means really today for the pollution for our world, and how we needed to improve the quality of our air. From this point of view, we know that today only 35% of the cars are internet connected. And for the year 2020, we expect that 98% of the new car will be connected. But we needed to wait till the year 2025 to have 98% of the overall car. This means the new one and the used one. And this is really a good point that we needed to face on this point of view. But the pollution is really one of the critical points that we needed to face. And one of the big aims of the project is to go to this direction. The last point is the infotainment. Maybe you know that in the old world, business is a huge business, almost 35 billion a year. And the major market for the infotainment is Europe. In the meantime, we needed to really improve more and more the quality, because the car in the future is becoming something completely different. And this is what we want to do. The last point is again related to what is happening with the cars connected. As I said, today we are quite good, 35%, but in 7, 8 years from now, 98% will be connected. Can you imagine how we can increase the market for the entertainment in Europe and the world? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Profumo. Very interesting. And this part of the project concerning emissions is so relevant. Last week, the European Commission adopted the communication, which is the new strategy for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and it is our contribution to what is happening in Poland, in Katowice, in our discussions concerning the fight against climate change and the adaptation. And in that communication, the Commission made it clear that there is a great opportunity through digital applications, but also through this new connected mobility. And it is not just about the electric cars that will lead to the decarbonization, of course, of our roads, but also about what you said, the ability to control the emissions. And it is wonderful that this is happening in a stretch of 600 kilometers, so in a very important corridor. What is your vision for the future? Could we see European roads being transformed by applying the principles of your project's outcomes?
You know, I think that this concept to have an open-air project, an open-air lab along 600 kilometers from Munich to Bologna, it's like a dream. And the step up from the lab, like we have, to the CEF project starting the year 2021 to the 2027, where the CEF will be money not only for roads, for airports, for rails, but will be also for this new generation of infrastructure. And this is a good point that we have, because today with this new generation of project, we have the possibility just to test in the real life through 3 different countries in 600 kilometers. This means that we are almost ready for the next generation. This means connect all Europe.
This is fantastic to hear that the European budget contributes to projects that are a dream and that can lead to a dream.
Yeah, and it's not just a closed dream, because we started from a research project, ICT2018, and we go in a few years to the CEF project. Then Europe is really becoming a reality.
Yes,
and the reality to having just an interconnected Europe, having this connectivity that you can move from Spain to Poland through all Europe connected, it's really a dream, and it's becoming pretty close.
Thank you, Mr. Profumo. Also for the lead to Spain, because we have with us Miguel Ángel Lajunas, who is the director of the Telecommunications Technological Center of Catalonia, so we really moved to Spain, and who will present us the project 5G Croco. You will tell us more about that, which will validate and optimize 5G technologies and architectures by testing 3 use cases in another very well-known corridor between Metz, Mexico, and Luxembourg. So this is the stretch between France, Germany, and Luxembourg.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and also I would like to thank the invitation from DG Connect, allowing me to stay with you this afternoon. I'm going to describe in 3 slides the 5G Croco. Basically, which is about these large-scale 5G trials along the European corridor. As mentioned in the introduction, the corridor is located in the center of Europe. The north of the corridor is crossing Luxembourg with 2 borders with Germany and France. The corridor goes south and then go east in order to re-enter again in Germany about the Saarland region. Within the consortium, they identified that some tasks and some fine-tuning and some preliminaries that not to be done, not to be deployed in the main circuit. So they identify another 3 sites close to the partners that also was reducing costs. 2 of them were big, and the other one is small. One of them is a closed circuit in Montlhéry, in France. There is another one in Germany. It's the famous A9 motorway Germany, as I said, and the small one which is going to be in Barcelona. As a trial is a technical validation of 5G, and it's cross-border, cross-vendor, cross-OEM or car manufacturers, MNO, mobile network operators, and also it's crossing the users, so the applications has to pass seamless across the border. Most of the 5G deployment is going to be in the borders. In the rest, it is expected that 4G will be enough for that. Of course, the project has 6 work packages, including one of coordination or for dissemination standards. And there is another one, the other one, there are 3 which are technical or engineering work. And there is another one in business case validation, which is basically the consortium has committed to find out new business models and opportunities for commercial use enabled by 5G on top of applications already deployed in 5G technology. The facts and figures, the project is 17 million euro. The EC contribution is approximately, both data is 13 million, and the duration is 3 years, starting in November 2018. Basically, we will have to describe in a few lines which is about the project, which is the main focus of the project. I will quote these 3. One is tele-operated driving. It's not autonomous, and I think I have one idea, the reason for that. So deliberately, I'm using in purpose, was not included the word autonomous there. Second one is high-definition map generation and distribution. This is concerning the network architecture mostly. And the last one is one of the cooperative connected autonomous mobility user case, which is the anticipated collision avoidance. Quoting which technologies are devoted on these 3 lines. The first line is the deployment of 5G equipment. Second one is basically linked to technology of mobile edge computing, the MECs. And the third one is also including, of course, that data fusion. And the third one is the application on collision avoidance, which is basically in the network slicing and entering in that debate, which is the modification. So as you can see, most of the effort in engineering the project is in the network side, more than in the other parts of a communication network. The number of partners is 24. Of course, there are 3 operators, one from Luxembourg, which is Post, Orange from France, and Deutsche Telekom from Germany. There are technical providers, is Ericsson, both in Germany and Sweden, Nokia in Germany, and Huawei. There are also OEMs from the car industry. The big names are Renault, Peugeot, Citroën, Volkswagen, and Volvo. There are SMEs, World Sensing, Nextworks, SEC, also from Luxembourg. Don't forget that. There are also highways or ministry authorities from Germany. There is also from the Wirtschaft, Saarland, and SANEF, which is the Société de Knowledge of France. Also, there are, including academia, there are several engineering centers. One is Eurecom, CDTC, I2CAT, and Fortis, and 2 universities, one in Athens, the National Cappadocian University of Athens, and a very important one, TUM, Technical University of Munich. Finally, this is the actual coordinator, Jesus Alonso, so if there is detailed questions about the project, please contact with him. Do not hesitate to do it. And before ending, my best desires for the other 2 projects, for success, and my support for 5G Carmen 5G movies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. These are indeed three very complementary projects, and I see that in your projects you will also be testing the anticipated cooperative collision avoidance, which is something that can bring enormous safety benefits to our roads.
Yeah, well, basically, instead of having an instantaneous advice, which could be actual for this moment, it's more valuable to make it, that was very old also in mathematics, to do predictive and improve your prediction if you can. So it's not one shot that you communicate with the driver. You try to communicate free, but always being anticipative over that. Also, it's important anticipation because you are depending on several mobile services that maybe you go away from the corridor you are going to lose. So the system has to advise that you take the control because they are predicting that the quality of service for the communications, not just for the application, is going to be done. And I think mathematics is what I use it many times.
No,
It's better to go by approximate states to the best place and not with an absolute communication.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that everyone who is here, but those who are also watching us, we know from the participation social media that the web stream has very good participation, have learned a lot from you. So it is very inspiring. We look forward also to the outcomes of these projects. I'd like to thank you for joining us, and please join me in thanking everyone who participated and made this such a fantastic session. We're almost on time. I wish you a very nice evening, and I thank you for being with us. Thank you very much.